John Matthews had chosen the night carefully. A Thursday, cold enough that winter still clung to the edges of spring. The kind of evening that encouraged people to stay inside, to sit longer at the table. He had asked Evelyn to cook, asked Sarah to come home early, even insisted Aaron be there on time. When they finally sat down in the formal dining room, the one they only used for important matters, John felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest. This dinner wasn't about food. It was about the future. The house was quiet in that uncomfortable way, where every small sound felt amplified. Forks scraped against porcelain. The low hum of the overhead light filled the pauses no one wanted to fill. John watched his son from across the table. Aaron barely looked up, pushing his food around with the tip of his fork, jaw tight, leg bouncing beneath the table. He looked like a man forced into a room he resented, not a son invited by his father. Evelyn tried to keep things normal. She asked about work, about traffic, about nothing that mattered. Sarah followed her lead, chiming in softly, her eyes darting between her father and her brother. John said little. He had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words. But tonight it felt heavier than usual. He cleared his throat once, then again, finally breaking the fragile calm. "I wanted us all together," John said evenly, "because there are decisions to be made. About the family, about where things are headed." Aaron let out a short, humorless laugh, not even bothering to hide it. "Of course there are," he muttered, still staring at his plate. John ignored the tone and continued. He spoke about responsibility, about stability, about protecting what they'd built. He used careful language, the same measured voice that had carried him through boardrooms and negotiations for decades. But before he could finish, Aaron dropped his fork onto the plate with a sharp clink and finally looked up. "Protecting?" Aaron said. "You mean controlling? Like you always do." The word hung there. Evelyn stiffened. Sarah froze mid-breath. John met his son's gaze. "That's not fair," he said calmly. Aaron leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the frustration he'd been swallowing all evening finally spilling over. "Isn't it? You control the money, the house, the business, every decision that matters. You call it protecting, but it's just you refusing to let go." Evelyn jumped in quickly. "Aaron, please. This isn't—" "No." Aaron cut her off, his voice rising now. "This is exactly it. We sit here like a perfect family. But the truth is, none of us own our lives. Not really." John felt something twist inside his chest, hot and sharp. He kept his expression neutral, but his hands clenched beneath the table. Years of sacrifice, of missed birthdays and sleepless nights flashed through his mind in an instant. Aaron leaned forward, eyes locked on his father, a sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. "You don't own anything here," he said loudly. "You just like to pretend you do." The room went dead still. Sarah stared at her brother in disbelief. Evelyn's face drained of color as she reached instinctively toward John, as if to steady him. But John didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't react the way Aaron clearly expected him to. Inside, though, his blood roared. John felt anger surge, thick and suffocating, pressing against decades of discipline. Every instinct told him to slam his hand on the table, to remind Aaron exactly who had paid for the roof over his head, the education he'd taken for granted, the life he'd squandered. But John had learned long ago that real power didn't come from shouting. Evelyn tried again, her voice trembling. "Aaron, stop. Please. Let your father finish." But the damage was done. The words couldn't be pulled back. The line had been crossed. John inhaled slowly. Then, without a word, he reached into the leather folder resting beside his chair. The movement was deliberate, controlled. He slid a single document out and placed it on the center of the table. The paper made a soft sound as it touched the polished wood. No one spoke. Aaron's smirk faded. Evelyn's hand froze midair. Sarah leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she looked at the document she couldn't yet read. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had been said, and for the first time that night, everyone at the table understood that this dinner had never been a discussion at all. Aaron was the first to break the silence, and he did it with a scoff. He glanced down at the paper in the center of the table and shook his head, the corner of his mouth curling with dismissive amusement. "What is this supposed to be?" he said, tapping the document with one finger. "Another spreadsheet? Another lecture in legal font?" John didn't answer right away. He watched his son carefully, the way he used to study competitors before a negotiation turned hostile. Aaron wasn't reading the document. Not yet. He was assuming this was just another empty gesture, another attempt to intimidate. Without raising his voice, John slid the document closer to Aaron. The movement was slow, intentional. The paper stopped directly in front of his son. "Read it," John said quietly. Aaron rolled his eyes but picked it up anyway, more out of irritation than curiosity. His gaze skimmed the top line at first, casual, careless. Then his eyes slowed. His brow furrowed, the smugness drained from his face as the meaning began to settle in. The room seemed to contract. Aaron's jaw tightened, muscles working as he reread the page, this time more carefully. His fingers curled around the edges of the paper, creasing it. "This isn't funny," he said, his voice lower now. "It's not meant to be," John replied. The words on the page were unmistakable. Legal language, clear, final. An amendment. A restructuring of the estate. Aaron Matthews' name appeared only once, and not in the way he expected. He looked up slowly, eyes sharp, searching his father's face for hesitation. There was none. "You cut me out?" Aaron asked. "You actually cut me out?" No one spoke. Evelyn's chair scraped softly against the floor as she shifted, her hand flying to her mouth. "John," she whispered, stunned. "What is this? You didn't tell me." "I didn't need permission," John said, still calm, though his chest felt tight. "And I didn't do this lightly." Evelyn stared at him, as if she were seeing a stranger. "You can't just erase your own son," she said, her voice shaking. "Not without a conversation. Not without warning." Sarah leaned forward, panic creeping into her expression. "Dad, please," she said quickly. "Whatever this is, we can talk about it. You don't have to do this tonight." Aaron laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So that's it," he said, dropping the paper back onto the table. "This is how you deal with disagreement? You pull rank. You punish." John met his gaze evenly. "This isn't punishment. It's consequence." The word hit hard. Riley, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had been watching the exchange with growing unease, his fingers tapping against his glass. "John," he said carefully, this changes things. You know that." "I do," John replied. Riley swallowed. His eyes flicked toward Aaron, then back to John. He could see the implications forming already: the business, the partnerships, the fragile balance they were barely holding together. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was a move with ripples. Aaron pushed his chair back slightly, anger simmering beneath the surface. "You think this makes you powerful?" he said. "You think this scares me?" John didn't respond. He didn't need to. The tension in the room was answer enough. Evelyn stood now, her voice breaking as she tried once more to bring them back from the edge. "Both of you stop. This is getting out of hand. We can fix this if we just—" A sharp vibration cut through her words. John's phone buzzed against the table. Every eye turned to it. John frowned slightly as he glanced at the screen. The name made his stomach drop. Detective Caroline Hayes. He hesitated for only a moment before answering. "John Matthews," he said. There was a pause as he listened, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. The room remained silent, everyone hanging on the change in his face. "Yes," John said finally. "I understand." He ended the call and slowly set the phone back down. Evelyn searched his eyes. "John, what is it?" John looked around the table, at his family, at the paper still lying between him and his son. His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "There's an investigation," he said, "and it's bigger than we thought." The silence that followed was heavier than before, and this time, no one at the table believed things could be undone. The document sat between them like a loaded weapon. No one reached for it now. No one needed to. Its presence alone had split the room in two, a thin sheet of paper drawing a line that felt impossible to cross. Aaron stared at it with open hostility, his face flushed, chest rising and falling as if he were physically holding himself back. "You planned this," he said finally, his voice shaking with restrained fury. "You didn't just wake up one day and decide this. You've been setting this up behind my back." John didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He simply folded his hands on the table, his posture rigid, eyes unreadable. To Aaron, that silence felt like the deepest betrayal of all. "You talk about legacy," Aaron went on, pushing his chair back just enough to stand if he wanted to. "About family, loyalty. And then you do this?" He gestured sharply at the document. "You throw your own son away like a bad investment. Evelyn let out a quiet sob, covering her mouth. Sarah turned toward her brother, her voice urgent. "Aaron, stop. This isn't helping." "No," Aaron snapped, not looking at her. "This is the truth. He doesn't care about family. He cares about control, about winning." John's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "You have no idea what I care about." "Then explain it," Aaron shot back. "For once, explain something instead of hiding behind silence and paperwork." For a moment, it looked like John might speak. His lips parted slightly. Then he closed them again. Whatever words rose in his throat stayed there, buried under years of discipline and pride. He had built an empire by never showing doubt, never justifying decisions once they were made. Tonight was no different. Evelyn leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "John," she pleaded, tears now spilling freely. "Please, this is your son. Whatever he's done, whatever you think he deserves, we can fix this. Just talk to him." John looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered in his eyes. Pain, fatigue, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "This isn't something words can fix," he said. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Dad, listen to yourself," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're pushing him away. Both of you are. Can we please stop and think before this becomes something we can't undo?" Aaron laughed bitterly. "Too late for that." Riley cleared his throat quietly, drawing attention at last. He hadn't wanted to speak, not here, not now, but the tension in the room was tightening like a vice. "John," he said cautiously, "we should talk, privately, about the business." John's eyes flicked toward him. "Now?" Riley nodded once. "It can't wait." That alone was enough to deepen the unease. Riley leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide the seriousness in his tone. "The investments aren't as stable as you think. Some of them haven't been for a while." Evelyn looked between them, confused. "What does that mean?" Riley hesitated. "It means this." He nodded toward the document. "This is happening at the worst possible time." Aaron seized on it instantly. "You hear that?" he said to John. "Even your partner knows you're sinking us, and instead of pulling us together, you cut me out." John said nothing, but Riley's words echoed louder than Aaron's accusations. Unstable. For a while. The thought crept in, uninvited, unwelcome. John had always believed he was in control. That belief had shaped his entire life. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with every breath. Voices overlapped, Evelyn crying softly, Sarah trying in vain to calm them, Aaron pacing like a caged animal. Through it all, John remained seated, still and silent, staring down at the table. He thought of the years he'd spent building everything in that room, the house, the business, the security he believed would protect his family. He had traded time for stability, warmth for certainty. And now, surrounded by the people he'd done it all for, he felt more alone than ever. For the first time, a dangerous question surfaced in his mind, one he had never allowed himself to ask. Had it all been worth it? The argument raged on around him, but John barely heard it. His eyes drifted back to the document, to the choice he'd made, and to the growing realization that whatever came next, there would be no easy way back. The phone rang again before the echoes of the argument had fully faded. John flinched this time. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, and for a brief, irrational moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Whatever was waiting on the other end felt heavy, the kind of call that changed things. He answered anyway, rising from the table and turning slightly away from the others. "Yes?" he said. As the voice spoke, the blood drained from his face. His grip tightened around the phone, knuckles whitening, legal scrutiny, regulatory flags, investments being reviewed retroactively. The words blurred together, but the meaning cut through with brutal clarity. Someone was looking closely, too closely, at the foundation of everything he'd built. "I understand," John said after a pause that felt far too long. He ended the call and stood there for a second, staring at the dark screen as if it might explain how things had gone so wrong so quietly. Aaron noticed immediately. "Well?" he asked, folding his arms. "Let me guess. Another mess you didn't bother to tell us about?" John returned to his seat, slowly, deliberately. He didn't answer right away, and that silence only fueled Aaron further. "You know what the problem is?" Aaron said, his voice sharpening. "You've been playing king for so long you stopped paying attention. Bad deals, shaky partners. And when it all starts to crumble, You act surprised. John met his gaze. You don't know what you're talking about. Aaron laughed, bitter and hollow. I know enough. You were greedy. You always wanted more, even when you had enough, and now we're all paying for it. Evelyn stepped forward, her hands trembling. Aaron, please, she said. This isn't helping. And John, she turned to her husband, eyes shining with fear. You're losing him. Can't you see that? If you don't soften now, you may never get him back. John looked at her, really looked, and felt the weight of her words press into him. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that would steady her. But the truth was, he wasn't steady himself. Sarah pulled Aaron aside, lowering her voice. What are you doing? She whispered. This isn't about winning. Aaron shook his head. It is now, he said flatly. If he won't protect this family, I will. Those words chilled the room. Riley cleared his throat, his face pale. There's something I need to say, he said quietly. Everyone turned toward him. I knew, Riley admitted, his voice tight. About some of the investments. They weren't as solid as we believed. I should have pushed back harder. I didn't. John stared at him, disbelief flashing across his face. You knew, he repeated. Riley nodded. I thought we could manage it, fix it before it became a problem. I didn't want to add more pressure. The betrayal landed harder than John expected. He had trusted Riley, trusted him with decisions that affected not just the business, but the family's future. Now that trust cracked, spiderwebbing into something fragile and uncertain. Before anyone could speak, John's phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen was unmistakable. Detective Caroline Hayes. John answered without moving from his chair. Yes. Her voice was calm, professional, and utterly unforgiving. Financial discrepancies, estate irregularities, potential legal consequences. She didn't raise her voice, didn't offer comfort. She didn't need to. When John ended the call, the room felt colder. It may lead to legal action, he said quietly. Evelyn's breath caught. Sarah's eyes widened. Aaron said nothing, but the satisfaction in his silence was unmistakable. John leaned back in his chair, the weight finally crushing down on him. For the first time in decades, he couldn't see a clear path forward. The empire he'd built piece by piece felt suddenly fragile, like it could collapse under the weight of secrets he hadn't even known existed. And worse than the fear of losing it all was the realization that in trying to protect everything, he may have already lost what mattered most. The letter arrived the next morning, thick cream paper sealed with an unfamiliar crest. John knew before he opened it that nothing good ever came in envelopes like that. He stood alone in his study, the house still quiet, winter light slipping through the tall windows. As his eyes moved down the page, his chest tightened. The words were polite, almost respectful, but the message underneath was unmistakable. One of the estate's largest investors was pulling out. Not slowly, not cautiously, immediately. The letter cited material misrepresentation and irreversible loss of confidence. It ended with a single chilling sentence. The Matthews holdings are no longer considered solvent. John lowered himself into the chair behind his desk, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. This wasn't a crack in the foundation. It was the foundation giving way. By the time the family gathered again that evening, the tension had shifted. It was no longer simmering, it was raw, exposed. Aaron stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, the letter now in his possession. So this is it, Aaron said, holding it up like evidence. The brilliant empire everyone was supposed to bow down to. John said nothing. Aaron turned toward Evelyn and Sarah, voice loud enough to make sure no one missed it. You trusted him. All of you did. And look where it got us. That's enough, Evelyn said sharply, but her voice wavered. She looked exhausted, dark circles etched beneath her eyes. This constant fighting, it's tearing us apart. Aaron ignored her, focusing on John. You made bad calls, he said. You let your pride run the business instead of common sense. And now the whole thing's collapsing. John felt the accusation like a blow, but he didn't respond. Every word rang too close to the truth. Evelyn finally turned on her husband, anger breaking through her fear. I can't do this anymore, she said. You keep saying you're protecting us, but all I see is you protecting your name, your image. What about us, John? What about your family? The question hung in the air. Sarah stepped forward, her voice softer but no less urgent. Dad, she said, please, just listen. Aaron's angry, but he's not wrong about everything. You don't have to give up control, but you can stop shutting him out. John looked at his daughter, saw the worry etched into her face, and felt something inside him crack. He had always believed strength meant standing firm. Now, he wasn't so sure. Riley cleared his throat, his face pale, eyes hollow. "There's more," he admitted. "My finances. They're tied into this. I borrowed against projected returns that never came. If this collapses, I go down with it." John stared at him. Another weight added to an already unbearable load. Before anyone could respond, John's phone rang again. He answered, already knowing who it would be. Detective Hayes didn't waste time. "The investigation is escalating," she said. "More parties are coming forward. Your family name is being mentioned." John closed his eyes. When the call ended, the silence felt final. Aaron broke it. "So what now?" he asked. "You still think you can fix this alone?" John looked around the room at his wife, worn down by years of mediating, at his daughter, pleading for peace, at his son, angry but waiting, at his partner, unraveling under shared mistakes. For the first time, John saw clearly how much he had given up to maintain control. And for the first time, he wondered if holding on was the very thing destroying everything. "I don't know," John said quietly. Aaron tilted his head. "Then maybe it's time you stepped aside." The idea settled heavily in John's chest, terrifying, humiliating, and yet unavoidable. As the room waited for his response, John realized the decision he'd feared his entire life was no longer optional. Aaron didn't ease into it. He stood at the head of the living room, shoulders squared, voice steady in a way that made it clear this wasn't an emotional outburst, it was a demand. "You need to step aside," he said. Effective, immediately. The words landed with a dull thud. John looked up slowly from the chair where he'd been sitting, his face unreadable. "That's not happening." Aaron let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh. "You don't have a choice anymore. Every decision you make just digs us deeper. Let me take over. Let me fix what you broke." John rose to his feet. "You don't fix decades of work by storming in and taking control," he said coldly. "And you don't earn leadership by threatening your own family." Evelyn stepped between them instinctively, her hands raised as if trying to physically hold the moment together. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Both of you, please stop, John. Just consider it. Just for a moment. If you keep pushing him away, you're going to lose him." John's jaw tightened. "I won't be strong-armed in my own home." Sarah moved closer to Aaron, placing a hand on his arm. "Aaron, this isn't the way," she said gently. "You're hurt. We all are. But tearing everything down won't fix it." Aaron pulled his arm away. "I'm done asking," he said. "I've spent my entire life waiting for him to trust me. It's never going to happen." Before John could respond, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the room like a blade. John opened the door himself. Detective Caroline Hayes stood on the porch, coat buttoned tight, expression serious enough that no one needed an explanation. She stepped inside, her presence instantly shifting the balance of the room. "We're past preliminary review," she said once everyone had gathered. "The investigation has reached a critical stage." Evelyn's breath hitched. "What does that mean?" "It means," Caroline continued, "that if certain discrepancies aren't addressed, asset seizure is a real possibility." Aaron turned sharply toward his father. "You hear that?" he said. "This is what I've been talking about." Then he faced the room, voice rising. "He's been hiding things. Accounts. Risk exposure. I found gaps months ago, and when I asked questions, I got shut out." John's eyes flashed. "That's a lie." "No," Aaron shot back. "It's betrayal. You kept me in the dark because you didn't want anyone questioning you. You didn't trust me enough to be honest." The accusation hung heavy. John felt it strike somewhere deeper than anger. For a moment, the room blurred, doubt creeping in where certainty had always lived. Had he protected the business or just his authority? Caroline watched silently, her expression unreadable. Evelyn looked at John, pleading now without words. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. John straightened. "I built this," he said firmly, "and I won't hand it over to someone who thinks destruction is the same as leadership." Aaron stared at him, stunned. Then his face hardened. "Then you've chosen," he said. He grabbed his coat, heading for the door. At the threshold, He turned back one last time. "If you don't back down," he said quietly, "I will take this whole thing down with me." The door slammed behind him, leaving the house shaking and John standing in the wreckage, wondering if his refusal had just cost him everything. Aaron came back 2 days later, not because the anger had cooled, but because there was nowhere else left to go. He stood in the doorway of John's study, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped as if the fight had drained something permanent out of him. John didn't offer him a seat. He didn't offer him comfort either. The space between them felt deliberate. "This ends now," John said. Aaron's jaw tightened. "That's why you called me?" John nodded once. "You want control?" he said. "You can have it. The business, the estate, all of it. Or you walk away for good. No more threats, no more half measures." The words were precise, almost surgical. Aaron laughed softly, the sound breaking midway. "You think that's mercy?" he asked. "You think forcing me to choose between everything and nothing fixes this?" "It's clarity," John replied. For a moment, Aaron looked like he might sit down, like he might finally admit how exhausted he was. Instead, he shook his head, anger flickering back to life. "You still don't get it," he said. "This isn't about the business. It's about being seen." Evelyn stepped into the room then, her face drawn tight with worry. "John, please," she said. "Stop turning this into a power struggle. He's your son, not an enemy." John didn't look at her. "I'm done negotiating." Sarah followed, her voice softer but no less urgent. "Dad, you don't have to do this," she said. "You can give him a second chance without giving up everything." John's silence was his answer. Before Aaron could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Detective Caroline Hayes entered, her presence immediately shifting the air in the room. "There's something you need to know," she said. "The financial issues go beyond bad investments." John stiffened. "Explain." "Fraud," Caroline said plainly. "Shell accounts, misreported liabilities. They trace back to Riley." The room went still. Riley, standing near the back, lowered his head. "I was trying to protect you," he said quietly. "Your legacy. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed." John felt the ground shift beneath him. "You lied to me," John said. Riley nodded. Yes, the betrayal hit harder than Aaron's threats ever had. John had trusted Riley with everything, decades of work, of reputation. Now that trust lay in pieces. Caroline continued. "This changes the scope of the investigation and the risk." Aaron stared at John, pain cutting through his anger. "So that's it," he said. "I was never the problem. You just needed someone to blame." John said nothing, but doubt crept in where certainty had always lived. As Aaron turned to leave again, Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "Please don't do this," she whispered. Aaron paused, hand on the doorframe. "I already lost my father," he said. "I'm not losing myself, too." When he left, John remained standing in the study, surrounded by truths he hadn't wanted to see. For the first time, he wasn't sure whether holding on had been strength or fear wearing a crown. The house fell into a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was strategic. John and Aaron moved around each other like enemies, sharing a battlefield, careful, guarded, saying only what was necessary and nothing more. When Aaron came by to collect documents or argue through lawyers instead of words, John stayed in his study. When John passed through the kitchen, Aaron made himself scarce. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them hardened into something cold and immovable. Evelyn tried to hold it together, but the effort showed. She fielded calls, relayed messages, smoothed over moments that threatened to explode. Each attempt at mediation drained her further. One evening, after another failed conversation with Aaron, she turned on John, her voice sharp with exhaustion. "I can't keep doing this," she said. "Your silence isn't strength, it's punishment." John didn't respond. He couldn't. Admitting that would mean admitting she was right. Sarah tried next. She sat across from her father late one night, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. "Dad," she said quietly, "you don't have to win this. You just have to stop losing him." John stared at the papers, spread across his desk. "If I give in now," he said, "everything falls apart." "Maybe it already has," Sarah replied gently. The next call from Detective Hayes removed any illusion of stability. Her voice was measured, but the content was brutal. Hidden fraudulent deals, accounts designed to mask losses, liabilities no one had disclosed. "The finances are hanging by a thread," she said. "If this unravels publicly, the estate won't survive." John felt the words sink deep. He had spent his life believing control was protection. Now it looked more like isolation. Aaron sensed weakness. He called late one night, his voice low and dangerous. "You have a choice," he said. "Give me what I'm asking for, or I start talking. About everything." John said nothing. "People would be very interested in what we've been hiding," Aaron continued. "Your reputation wouldn't survive it." John hung up without responding, his hands trembling for the first time in years. Alone in his study, he stared at the walls lined with plaques and photographs, proof of a life spent building something solid. Now, they felt like relics of a belief that no longer held. He wondered when leadership had turned into loneliness, when authority had cost him his family. The tension finally broke, not with a shout, but with a suitcase. Sarah stood in the hallway, quietly packing, tears streaking her face. Evelyn hovered nearby, helpless. John watched from the doorway, heart heavy. "I just need space," Sarah said softly. "I can't fix this." John nodded, unable to speak. As she walked out the door, the house felt emptier than ever, and for the first time, John wasn't sure how much more it could lose. John spent the night alone in his study, staring at the same photograph he'd avoided for years. It showed Aaron as a teenager, standing awkwardly beside him at a company event. Suit too big, smile forced. Back then, John had mistaken obedience for closeness, silence for respect. He had told himself there would be time later. There always was, until there wasn't. Aaron's apologies replayed in his mind, not just the recent ones, but the earlier attempts too. The awkward calls, the half-written messages that never quite said enough. John had brushed them aside, convinced that strength meant not bending. Now, sitting in the quiet he'd created, he wondered if the damage was already beyond repair. The phone rang just after midnight. John considered letting it go. Instead, he answered. "I know I don't deserve this," Aaron said, his voice low, stripped of its usual edge. "But I need you to hear me." John closed his eyes. "I took everything you did for granted," Aaron continued. "The safety net, the chances. I told myself I was angry because you controlled everything, but the truth is, I was jealous of your certainty, of how easy it all looked." John felt something tighten in his chest. "I've been failing for a long time," Aaron said quietly. "And instead of owning that, I blamed you." The honesty disarmed him more than anger ever had. Still, John didn't respond right away. He couldn't. Too much history pressed between them. Evelyn found him later, sitting in the dark. She didn't sit beside him this time. She stood, arms folded, exhaustion etched deep into her face. "You can't keep punishing him for wanting your approval," she said softly. "And you can't keep punishing yourself by pretending you don't need him." John looked up at her. "What if it's too late?" "Then at least you'll know you tried," she replied. They met Aaron the next afternoon at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Neutral ground. No power, no territory. Just 3 chairs and a table too small for the weight they brought with them. Aaron arrived first, shoulders tense, hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. When John walked in, Aaron stood instinctively, then sat back down, unsure. They spoke carefully at first, polite, guarded. But it didn't last. "You never said you were proud," Aaron said suddenly. "Not once." John stiffened. "That's not true." "You said it with contracts," Aaron replied. "With rules, never with words." The old wounds surfaced, fast resentments, layered over misunderstandings. Silence piled on silence. John felt the familiar urge to retreat, to shut it down before it cut deeper. But something stopped him. He looked at his son, not the threat, not the liability, but the exhausted man sitting across from him. And for the first time, John admitted the cost of his anger. Holding on to pride had felt powerful. Now it just felt lonely. "I didn't know how," John said finally. "I thought providing was enough." Aaron swallowed hard. It wasn't. The truth landed quietly between them. When they stood to leave, nothing was fixed. Not really. But John placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder, brief, uncertain. "We can try," John said. "That's all I'm offering." Aaron nodded. "That's more than I had yesterday." As John walked away, he knew forgiveness wouldn't come quickly. Trust would have to be rebuilt piece by piece. And even now, doubt lingered whether this fragile piece could survive what was still coming. John thought he had already seen the worst of it. That illusion shattered the moment Detective Caroline Hayes laid the files across his desk. They were thicker than anything he'd expected. Bank statements, shell accounts, wire transfers looping through entities John had never heard of. The dates went back years, not months, years. "This isn't damage control," Caroline said evenly. "It's a pattern." John flipped through the pages, his hands unsteady. Numbers he recognized. Signatures he didn't. Aaron's name appeared again and again, not as a passive beneficiary, but as an active participant. Whatever mistakes John had assumed his son made, they were nothing compared to this. "When were you going to tell me?" John asked quietly. Aaron stood across the room, arms crossed, eyes hard. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." John looked up sharply. "It matters when it puts this family in the crosshairs." Caroline didn't soften her tone. "There are criminal investigations underway," she said. "Your son's actions have triggered them, and your family name is attached to every one." The words struck deeper than any accusation Aaron had ever thrown at him. John had spent his life protecting that name, building it carefully, guarding it fiercely. Now it was being dragged into places he couldn't control. Aaron scoffed. "You're acting like I did this alone. You built the system. I just used it." John stood. "You abused it." The room heated instantly. Voices rose. Accusations flew, Aaron insisting he'd been set up to fail. John demanding accountability Aaron wasn't ready to give. Each word peeled back another layer of trust, leaving something raw and exposed beneath. "I was trying to survive," Aaron said. "You wouldn't let me breathe, and you nearly destroyed everything to prove it." John shot back. Evelyn stepped between them again, her face pale with fear. "Stop," she said. "Please, this won't help." She turned to John, desperation spilling over. "He needs help. Legal help. Financial help. Whatever it takes." John felt the familiar surge of betrayal twist inside him. He had opened the door to reconciliation, and this was what waited on the other side. Caroline gathered her files. "Time is not on your side," she said. "If you want to mitigate the damage, decisions need to be made now." John looked at Aaron. Really looked. The anger was still there, but beneath it was panic, fear. The same fear John had felt decades ago when everything he'd built had been at risk. "If I do this," John said slowly, "it's on my terms." Aaron hesitated. "You step back," John continued. "Full transparency, no more excuses, and you take responsibility." Aaron's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. The relief in Evelyn's eyes was immediate. As the meeting ended, John sank into his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down hard. Helping Aaron meant exposing himself, his reputation, his influence, everything he'd worked for. The fallout could cost them the business, the house, the future he'd imagined. Bankruptcy was no longer a distant threat. It was a real possibility. John stared at the files, at the mess his family now sat inside, and felt the question rise again, heavier than before. Was saving his wealth worth losing his family's dignity, or was there already no way to save both? Aaron showed up unannounced, looking smaller than John had ever seen him. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. He stood in the doorway of the study, shifting his weight like a man waiting for a verdict he already feared. When he finally spoke, his voice barely held together. "I'm running out of time," Aaron said. "The legal bills, I can't keep up. If I don't get help, everything collapses." John didn't invite him in. He stayed behind the desk, hands folded, remembering a different version of his son, sharp-tongued, defiant, convinced he was owed something. The words Aaron had hurled at him over the years echoed back now, sour and unresolved. "You didn't come here to apologize," John said quietly. Aaron swallowed. "I came because I don't have anyone else." Evelyn appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension. She looked from one man to the other and stepped forward without hesitation. "John," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "He's asking for help, not control. Help." John turned away, staring out the window at the bare trees. "Help didn't mean much to him before," he said. "Neither did mercy," Evelyn replied. "And look where that got us." John said nothing. The truth, in her words, hurt more than accusation ever could. Later that afternoon, John sat across from Michael Graham, the family attorney, a man who had known the Matthews name for decades. The office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Michael didn't waste time softening the blow. "The damage is extensive," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Civil exposure, criminal risk. If this goes public, the legacy you've built could be reduced to a cautionary tale." John closed his eyes briefly. "What happens if I step in?" "You might limit the fallout," Michael said. "Or you might attach yourself permanently to the mess." The words followed John home like a shadow. That night, he and Evelyn sat together in the living room, the house too quiet again. "I don't know how to forgive him," John admitted. "Every time I think I'm past it, I remember what he said, what he did." Evelyn reached for his hand. "Forgiveness isn't pretending it didn't happen," she said. "It's choosing not to let it destroy what's left." John looked at her, saw the exhaustion, the quiet determination. She had held this family together while he fought wars on every other front. The next morning, John called Aaron back. He laid out the terms slowly, deliberately. Financial support, but only through attorneys. Full transparency. Therapy. Accountability. No more manipulation. No more lies. Aaron listened, nodding. Shame etched across his face. "I'll do it," he said. "Whatever it takes." When the call ended, John felt no relief, only the weight of what he'd agreed to carry. He had chosen mercy over pride. Whether it would save his family or cost him everything was still painfully unclear. The rebuilding didn't begin with hope. It began with routine. Therapy appointments marked Aaron's calendar now, not as promises of transformation, but as obligations he could no longer avoid. John paid for them quietly, through lawyers and invoices, keeping the arrangement clinical. When he asked about progress, his questions were precise attendance, compliance, documentation, never feelings, never forgiveness. Aaron understood the distance. He didn't challenge it. He showed up, week after week, confronting insecurities he had buried beneath anger and entitlement. He spoke, sometimes haltingly, about jealousy, about living in a shadow that never seemed to move. There were no dramatic breakthroughs, just exhaustion and the slow dismantling of habits that had once felt like armor. John watched from afar. He reviewed reports. He listened when attorneys mentioned improvement or setbacks. He nodded when therapists spoke of engagement and accountability. But he kept his guard up. Trust, he reminded himself, had nearly destroyed everything. Evelyn felt the shift first. The house felt lighter, the air less sharp. She allowed herself cautious relief, though it came at a cost. Nights were still tense between her and John, conversations circling the same unresolved questions. "You're helping him," she said once. "But you're still punishing yourself." John didn't argue. He didn't know how to stop. Sarah returned more often now, bringing warmth John hadn't realized was missing. She noticed the changes, Aaron listening more, reacting less. She spoke to John gently, persistently. "He's trying," she said. "I know you're scared to believe it, but don't miss this." John wanted to believe her. He truly did. The truce between him and Aaron was fragile, built on necessity rather than trust. They met in boardrooms and law offices, working side by side to salvage what remained of the Matthews legacy. Their conversations stayed professional, clipped. Every so often, a look would pass between them. Recognition, regret, but neither dared to speak it aloud. Time did its quiet work. John caught glimpses of the son he remembered, not the angry man who'd stormed out, but the thoughtful boy who once asked too many questions. Aaron began asking for advice again, not demands, small things, careful things. It unsettled John more than he expected, because hope was dangerous. The family gathered again one evening, nothing formal, just dinner. The conversation was cautious, but warmer, laughter tentative. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. Later that night, alone in his study, John stared at the same photographs lining the walls. He saw success there, but also absence. He wondered how much of Aaron's pain he had missed while building something he thought would protect them all. Trust, he realized, wasn't restored by effort alone. It required vulnerability, something he still wasn't sure he could afford. As the family moved forward, scars remained visible. Conversations avoided certain topics. Words were chosen carefully. And beneath the surface, Fear lingered, the fear that one misstep could undo everything. The rebuilding had begun, but whether it would hold was a question no one dared to answer. The signs were small at first, easy to dismiss if John wanted to. A missed therapy session, explained away as a scheduling mix-up. A job interview Aaron claimed had gone well, but never mentioned again. The careful routines that had once marked progress began to loosen, then fray. John noticed everything. He always did. Trust, once broken, sharpened the eye. John found himself asking questions he hated asking, checking details he wished he didn't need to verify. Each lapse pulled him back to the same fear that this rebuilding was just another illusion, another cycle he'd seen too many times before. When Aaron missed a second therapy appointment, John didn't raise his voice. He didn't confront him at all. He simply went quiet. The silence carried more weight than anger ever had. "You're pulling away again," Evelyn said one night, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "So is he. Can't you see that?" "I see reality," John replied. "Patterns don't disappear just because we want them to," Evelyn exhaled sharply. "Or maybe you don't want to forgive him because forgiving means risking being hurt again." "It means every time I think we're moving forward," John said, standing now, "you find a way to pull us back. Another crisis, another excuse, another lie dressed up as need." "That's not fair," Aaron shot back. "You don't know what I'm dealing with." "I know exactly what you're dealing with," John said. "I've been dealing with it my entire life." The room seemed to shrink around them. Evelyn hovered near the doorway, already sensing the fracture about to split wide open. "You manipulated the truth," John continued, the restraint finally gone. "You hid things. Again. And you expected me to clean it up because that's what I've always done." Aaron's voice cracked. "I was trying to survive." "And I was trying to save you," John replied sharply. "There's a difference." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Aaron's defenses crumbled in real time. His shoulders sagged, hands shaking as he pressed them to the table. "I've never been enough," Aaron said suddenly, the anger dissolving into something raw and exposed. "No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was always chasing a standard I couldn't reach." John felt the weight of that confession slam into him. "I've given you everything," John said, the words finally spilling out, heavy with years of buried resentment. "Opportunities, protection, second chances, and you've thrown it away. I can't keep enabling this." Evelyn stepped forward, tears streaming now. "Please," she begged. "Both of you. You're saying things you can't take back." But John didn't stop. "I won't fund your destruction," he said to Aaron, "and I won't pretend that love means unlimited rescue." Aaron stared at him, stunned by the coldness in his father's tone. Then, slowly, he broke. His face crumpled, breath hitching as years of frustration and shame poured out. "I just wanted you to see me," Aaron whispered, "not as a problem, not as a disappointment." The silence that followed was devastating. John turned away, gripping the back of a chair as doubt surged in. Had he failed him? Had his version of strength created the very weakness he despised? The questions cut deep, reopening wounds John had spent a lifetime ignoring. Evelyn moved to Aaron's side, holding him as if he were a child again. "This can't be the end," she said softly. John watched them, chest tight, and realized something painful and unavoidable. This wasn't about money anymore, or control, or even trust. It was about two broken men, each carrying damage the other didn't know how to heal. "I can't do this alone," John said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Aaron looked up. "If there's any chance forward," John continued, "it won't come from bailouts or ultimatums. It comes from facing what we've both avoided." The words hung there, not forgiveness, not rejection, but something uncertain and fragile. As the room fell silent again, John understood that this confrontation had changed everything. Whether it would destroy them or finally force them to heal was a question neither of them could yet answer. The court date arrived with no warning and too much weight. John had known it was coming. Every document, every meeting with attorneys pointed to this moment, but standing outside the courthouse made it feel brutally real. The building loomed cold and indifferent, its stone steps worn smooth by decades of judgment. Aaron stood a few feet away, suit pressed, hands trembling slightly at his sides. He looked smaller again, like a boy, pretending to be a man. John stayed back, not beside him. That distance was intentional. Support? Yes, but not absolution. Evelyn reached for John's hand. "Please," she said softly. "Be there. He needs to see you." John nodded once, the movement stiff. He wasn't sure whether he was going inside for Aaron or for himself. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with murmurs and the shuffle of paper. When Aaron's name was called, every sound seemed to fade. John watched from the back row as his son stood before the judge, his mistakes laid out in careful, clinical language. Fraud, misrepresentation, breach of trust. Words that stripped away excuses and left only consequences. John felt the sting of public humiliation not for himself, but for what it revealed about his family. This was the cost of silence, of control mistaken for care. Evelyn sat rigid beside him, eyes fixed forward, lips pressed tight to keep from trembling. When proceedings paused, Aaron turned just enough to find John in the crowd. Their eyes met. Aaron's were red, raw with shame. In that moment, he looked less like a defendant and more like a child waiting for judgment from his father. Before the verdict, Aaron leaned toward his attorney, then glanced back again. During a brief recess, he approached John, voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, "but I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." John felt the familiar urge to retreat, but didn't. "I won't excuse this," John said quietly. "But I'm here." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was presence. The sentence, when it came, was lighter than expected. Probation, restitution, mandatory oversight, no prison. Relief rippled through the room, but it didn't touch John. Consequences avoided were not the same as damage undone. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh, almost cruel. Aaron exhaled shakily. "Thank you for coming," he said. John nodded, his expression unreadable. He knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of another reckoning, one without judges or verdicts to guide them. As they walked away, John felt the fragile outline of hope forming, uncertain and easily broken. The court had spoken. Now, the harder work would begin. Healing didn't arrive with apologies or grand gestures. It crept in quietly, disguised as effort. The Matthews family moved forward in small, deliberate steps, careful not to fracture what little progress they'd made. John and Aaron spoke more often now, but never without caution. Their conversations stayed grounded in the present schedules, obligations, next steps, anything safer than the past. Trust, John had learned, didn't return because someone asked for it. It returned when it was no longer demanded. John began therapy reluctantly. The first session was mostly silence, broken only by the ticking of a clock and his own discomfort. He wasn't used to talking about fear, especially his own. Over time, words surfaced. About control, about absence, about believing that providing was the same as loving. The realization cut deeper than any accusation Aaron had ever made. "I thought vulnerability was weakness," John admitted one afternoon. "I was wrong." Aaron, meanwhile, stayed the course. Slowly, unevenly. He attended therapy, worked under supervision, and accepted the restrictions placed on him without protest. Some days he showed genuine growth. Other days, the old defensiveness crept back in. John noticed both, measuring progress against memory, still afraid of disappointment. Evelyn held the center. She encouraged, translated, softened moments that threatened to unravel. "You don't have to forget," she told John. "You just have to stop reliving it." The family gathered again, quiet dinners, cautious laughter. Forgiveness came in fragments, a shared look, a held door, a question asked without suspicion. Each small moment mattered. One evening, John and Aaron sat together on the back porch, the air cool, the house silent behind them. They didn't speak for a long time. "I know I hurt you," Aaron said finally. "And I know saying that doesn't fix it." John nodded. "I hurt you too." The admission surprised them both. They talked not to resolve everything, but to acknowledge it. The expectations, the silence, the years spent talking past each other. It wasn't closure, but it was honesty. As the night deepened, John felt something shift, not relief, but resolve. Healing would be slow. Pain would resurface. Trust would waver. But for the first time, the path forward felt real. Whether it would last was still uncertain, but for now, it was enough. Aaron asked the question without ceremony. They were sitting across from each other in the quiet of John's study, the same room where so many battles had been fought. Aaron didn't pace. He didn't hedge. He simply said, "I'm thinking about starting something on my own. I don't want money. I just want your advice." The words stopped John cold. For a moment, he waited for the familiar follow-up, for the angle, the hidden request, the subtle pressure. It didn't come. Aaron sat there, hands folded, eyes steady, not defiant, not pleading, just honest. John leaned back slowly. "What kind of business?" Aaron explained, tentative but thoughtful. "A modest idea. Realistic, grounded, no shortcuts, no grand promises." As he spoke, John recognized something he hadn't seen in years. Accountability without entitlement. He felt the shift then, not dramatic, but undeniable. Instead of reaching for his checkbook, John asked questions. Hard ones. About risk, about structure, about failure. He shared lessons he'd learned the painful way. Without shielding Aaron from the truth, the conversation felt different, balanced. When it ended, John realized he hadn't felt defensive once. Evelyn noticed first. Later that evening, she touched John's arm gently. "You sounded lighter today," she said. "I felt it," John replied. Sarah, home for dinner, smiled cautiously. "This is a step," she said. "Not the finish line." John nodded. He understood now. Healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about choosing not to be ruled by it. That night, alone, John confronted the anger he'd carried for so long. It had protected him once. Now it only weighed him down. Letting it go didn't mean forgetting. It meant making room for something better. As weeks passed, the family felt the change. Conversations deepened. Laughter returned, hesitant but real. Trust wasn't restored, but it was possible again. The walls John had built didn't collapse all at once. They softened, cracked, enough to let light in. For the first time in years, John believed redemption wasn't just possible, it was happening. The moment came quietly, without ceremony. John and Aaron stood side by side in the backyard, the late afternoon air cool and still. No lawyers, no deadlines, just space. Aaron broke the silence first. "Thank you," he said, "for believing in me again, even when I didn't make it easy." John looked at his son, really looked. The sharp edges were softer now. The restless defiance had been replaced with something steadier. "Belief isn't blind," John said. "It's earned, and you're earning it." Aaron nodded, emotion tightening his throat. That night, the house filled again. Not with tension, but with people. A modest holiday dinner, nothing extravagant. Laughter rose cautiously at first, then freely. The scars were still there, visible in careful glances and measured words, but the weight had shifted. This wasn't denial. It was progress. Evelyn watched it all unfold with quiet relief. Later, she and John stood together in the kitchen, hands brushing as they worked. "We survived," she said softly. John met her eyes. "Because you held us together." They spoke then not about mistakes, but resilience, about choosing each other, again and again, even when it hurt. Aaron, for the first time, spoke about his plans, not as a reaction to his father, but as a direction of his own. There was confidence in his voice. Responsibility. John listened without interrupting, proud but careful. Later, alone, John reflected on the journey, on control mistaken for love, on boundaries learned the hard way. He understood now that letting go didn't mean losing it, meant trusting the strength of what remained. As the night ended, the family stood together, scarred but unbroken. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to face together. The walk began without a destination. John and Aaron moved side by side along the familiar trail behind the old neighborhood park. The one John used to jog when Aaron was a boy, and life still felt simple. The trees were bare now, branches stretching upward like open hands. Their footsteps fell into a steady rhythm, the silence between them no longer tense, just thoughtful. "I used to think strength meant never backing down," John said at last. His voice carried no edge now, only reflection. "I thought if I stayed firm long enough, everything would fall into place." Aaron nodded, eyes fixed ahead. "I thought strength meant proving you wrong," he replied. "That if I could succeed on my own terms, I wouldn't need anything from you." They walked a little farther before John spoke again. "We were both wrong." The admission felt like a release. John slowed, turning slightly toward his son. "Forgiveness isn't easy," he said. "But it's the only way to heal. Not because it erases what happened, but because it keeps the past from owning the future." Aaron swallowed hard. "I didn't understand that before. I thought forgiveness meant getting away with things." "It means facing them," John said. Together, they resumed walking, the air cool, the world quiet around them. Aaron spoke about his plans, measured, realistic, grounded in work he'd already begun. No shortcuts, no borrowed authority, just effort. John listened without correcting, without steering. For the first time, he trusted the direction wasn't his to control. Back at the house, the family gathered again, not for a milestone, but for a moment. Coffee on the porch, a shared meal without tension. Evelyn laughed easily now, the lines of worry softened. Sarah teased her brother, warmth replacing caution. These were the victories no balance sheet could measure. John watched it all with a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Later, as evening settled in, Aaron prepared to leave on his own schedule, to his own place. He paused at the door, turning back. "I know, I still have a lot to prove," he said. John shook his head. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he replied. "Just keep going." Aaron smiled, genuine, unguarded, and stepped out into the night. John stood there for a moment longer, feeling the weight lift. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. The family lingered together, savoring small conversations, shared silence. They knew the road ahead would still demand effort. Healing wasn't an ending, it was a practice, but they had learned how to walk it. As John finally turned off the lights and stepped outside, he looked down the quiet street where Aaron's car had disappeared. He felt something settle inside him, closure, not as an ending, but as acceptance. They had survived the darkest times. They had chosen forgiveness over pride, connection over control. John and Aaron walked into the future, their bond stronger than ever, a testament to the power of forgiveness and love.